Hey YouTube. Alright, so we just got done with the 10th round of the 2020 Altabox Norway chess tournament. And it has been a very exciting tournament. Now, the world champion Magnus Carlsen, before he came into this tournament, he had a 2-year non-lose streak. Now, what I mean by that is he hadn't lost a game, so he only drew or he's only drawn games or won games in this past 2 years. And as you guys know, a couple of rounds ago, he lost a game to Jan Krzysztof Duda of Poland. So, you know, that was a pretty crazy situation. And, so there's a lot of youngsters in this tournament. There's Alireza Firouzja, he's 17. And then there's Jan Krzysztof Duda, is 20, I believe. And so, they're like the young, up-and-coming chess players on the world scene. So, it was really crazy to see that happen. But, nobody's perfect. It's going to happen. And now the game I have for you guys right now is the 10th round of the tournament. And it's between Magnus Carlsen of Norway and Levon Aronian of Armenia. And like I said before, it's just been a very exciting tournament. And it doesn't stop... doesn't stop here. It continues on with this game here. And so if you guys want to stick with me to the end, I actually have a couple of points that I'm going to be hitting analysis on. And it should answer some of you guys' questions as far as what might be going on. Or, you might be looking at a position and say like, hey, can I do this here? I'll be answering, a couple of those questions and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get rolling here and get this game started. And we'll see what we have. All right, so we have knight f3. So that's going to be the ready starting off. And we have d5, d4. So we've gotten into the queen's pawn or queen's gambit type of position. c4, so we have the queen's gambit decline on the board. e6, typical way to defend. Knight to c3. All right. Bishop to e7. All right, so now we have c takes d5. And so now we have the exchange variation of the queen's gambit declined. All right, so just developing pieces here. Bishop f4, real nice square for the bishop here. All right, queen to c2. All right, g6. So we can already tell black's intention here is to play bishop f5, which they do. And so go ahead and defend that with bishop to d3. Asking the bishop, what does he want to do? So we'll go ahead and trade here. Now this is, all right, let me see. So yeah, queen takes back, right? Okay. All right, so we have h4, a5. Okay, wait, hold on. All right, so if I have any chess coaches out there, like, do not take this game and show this to your students. Because your students will be like, oh, well, wait, can't I just push wing pawns, because, the world champion did. Okay, he's the world champion. It's a little bit different. But so we have queen to b6, right? Bishop to g5. Now, this is the point here that I want you guys to take a look at. This pawn here on a4 seems pretty juicy. And it might seem like, hey, man, why can't I just take the pawn? Like, I don't know what the issue is. Like, it hits the queen, stuff like that. That's the part that in the game that I'm going to be coming back to, do a little bit more analysis on. So we have a rook left on h3. Queens want to trade. I'll actually be looking at this point too here. We're going to go ahead and decline that trade. All right, so we got knight takes e4, pawn takes e4, queen takes. So right now you have a... looks like you have an extra pawn here as white. And you put a little pressure on this king here. All right, so now we're going to have to double our pawns here because, of course, you're not going to take back with the queen and just lose the queen. And so we're just double attacking that pawn. So as you can see right here, the pawn just goes, it drops. So we have the same pawn count for each side. And so something I want you to notice over here is this a4 pawn. How it's advanced pretty far and is definitely having a little bit of influence in the game. So that's going to be something that's going to be important for a little bit later on here. All right, so just getting the queen in a nice little central position here. Close to the king. It's that's always a dangerous spot. Going to attack this pawn another time here. All right, attack the undefended rook on b1. Defending it with queen to d3. All right, so we're going to go ahead and trade these queens off the board here. All right. So b3. Now, like I said earlier, that a4 pawn is definitely an important pawn here. As far as this, so we're in an end game now. So we have just rooks and pawns on an end game, and so go ahead and double. So we're attacking that undefended rook on c2, defending it with c4. All right, rook's taken. Rook's getting swapped off the board here. Go ahead and defend that pawn here. Now, of course, you know, the only way to go for the king is going to be to h2. You know, of course, you can't cross over into f2 or, you know, anything else, because that rook here is, you know, like I said in my previous video, this rook is a pig on the 7th right now. It's attacking this pawn here, and, you know, it's making it really hard for this king to move. So, all right. Getting the king in a good position. Now, like I said before, you know, so we have the rook on the 7th. So like I said before, you know, once the queens come off the board, you know, you're able to start moving your kings around, stuff like that. It's a lot safer of a situation. There's a lot of tactics involved, you know, when you're moving when you're moving kings and you have queens on the board. And so it's not a very safe thing for your king to do. But right here, as you can see, we have kings and pawns. And, you know, that's a perfect situation for the kings to, you know, start moving, getting centralized, and, you know, they become a big part of the fight, you know, later on in the game and stuff like that. So, you know, as you can see, you know, white has a pretty good king's position. But one of the things that influences an endgame is when you start having passed pawns. And if you notice, you know, black has these two passed pawns over here, and then white has these two passed pawns over here. And so, it basically comes down to, you know, a pawn race, you know, because your ultimate goal when you get into an end game is, you know, of course, either to checkmate your opponent or, you know, to start racing your pawns down the board once they have the ability, you know, like these ones, like I said, they have the ability to come up here. You know, these pawns have the ability to come down here. All right, and so like I said, Aronian is starting to push his pawns down, and white's king is having to try to, you know, come back, and the rook's going to have to try to come back. And, you know, once pawns get to a certain point, you know, it becomes very hard, if not impossible, to try to stop them, you know, from further advancing. All right, so it is in this position here that Magnus Carlsen did resign. So like I said before, it's been a really exciting tournament. Magnus Carlsen actually went into this tournament not having lost a single game in 2 years, and this is his second loss in this tournament. Like I said, nobody's perfect, and so you know, it's bound to happen at some point. But if you want to just take a look at this position here, like before I go back to the point that I was talking about before, if you just look at this position here, you know, you see that these two pawns are here, right? And so they're trying to get to the end of the board. This rook is trying to you know, keep hold of him. This rook is behind this. So anytime you have passed pawns, you definitely want to try to put your rook, you know, behind, and so that way they can, you know, they can successfully push down the board. Now, even if we were to move this king somewhere else, like let's say we moved it over here or something like that, one of the in-game concepts that, you know, you learn as a beginner is that two connected passed pawns on the 6th rank have the ability to overtake a rook. Now, I mean, that might sound kind of crazy because you're thinking, wait a minute, like two pawns overtake a rook? Well, see, the problem is the fact that, let's say this rook is somewhere else, and you were to take this, you know, you would take this pawn here. You know, this pawn will push down, and then this rook doesn't have the ability to come back before the pawn actually is able to promote. So that's an in-game concept, and it's because of this position here that you know, Magnus Carlsen went ahead and resigned. You know, there just isn't a way, you know, after this one is pushed, there's just no way this rook can, you know, hold these two pawns from promoting. And if we just back up a touch more, there's another in-game concept as well. And so we have this position here. And some of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, okay, so there's 3 pawns that I have, and then there's only 2 pawns that they have, so that's just more winning. So, you know, you always want to trade down when you have, you know, superior material, right? Most of the time, yes. But in this particular position, if we were to trade down here, this king is not going to be able to get into this square of this pawn. And that is another, you know, beginner in-game concept that a lot of people, you know, they'll learn. And then there are quite a few people that don't know. And so, I mean, of course, if you're going ahead and you're going to be pushing this pawn, there's not a way for this king to stop this pawn. And so, you know, that's definitely something that, you know, that's something that Carlsen saw, of course, and so that's why he moved his rook away. And so if we go back to this position here, let's see here. All right, so we go back to this position here, move 13, and so if you notice, it's kind of weird because you know, you have both kings in the center of the board. This one's kind of awkwardly here to f1, and so you know, generally you don't want to start pushing pawns. You don't want to start attacking the person, you know, before you get your kings into safety. But you know, these guys for this particular game just kind of threw that out the window. Said, you know, screw that. And but like I said, let's take your attention back to this point here. Now, I've said in previous videos that, you know, one pawn has the ability to stop two pawns from moving. And so if you notice, it's going to be really, really hard for you to try to push this pawn forward because this pawn is just going to automatically take it. And so, like I said before, if you guys notice towards the end of the game, you know, there was a lot of play over in this side of the board. And so if we get to the point in the game that I wanted to get to, okay, so we got h5, right? And so you're thinking, okay, h5, so wait a minute, isn't this pawn just, you know, so it's like I have the knight and I have the queen attacking it and then just the rook is defending it. So, I mean, isn't it just a free pawn? Well, the thing about it is in this particular position with this king here on this diagonal, it's actually not. Because if you were to take here, you're like, hey, cool, I just want a pawn, right? You have to think about this move here. And this checks the king and also places an attack on this knight. And so this is clearly something that Magnus Carlsen saw. And so, you know, this is the type of thing where you might calculate one move deep and you'll see something. And if you were just calculating 2 or 3 moves deep, you know, basically, you know, the difference between different levels of play, you know, you'd be able to visualize things like that. And this is where tactics come into play. And also earlier in the game, like I said, with the h5 pawn, when studying in games really comes into play, because studying in games can help you in the middle game and the, you know, and the beginning part of the opening and stuff like that in the game. But yeah, guys, that is the game. And like I said, you know, go ahead and subscribe and like, and let me know if there are any other videos that you'd like for me to take a look at. And I'm actually going to be doing a full analysis on this game with the video of myself and my, you know, my other layout. So if you guys, like I said, if you guys have any other games or any other types of tournaments or anything you'd like for me to cover, or there's any concepts you want me to explain, I'll definitely make a video about it. But you guys have a good day, and I appreciate it very much. All right.